Hello and welcome to Direct Talk. I'm your host for the day, Salam Berhane. Joining us in the studio is Ambassador Wondimu Assaminew, former ambassador to Somalia. Thank you, Ambassador, for joining us.
Thank you Samar. Salam.
So let me start with a general question. Tigray, the past 11 months, has went through extremely difficult times, to say the least. So what does the genocidal crimes, the siege imposed on Tigray, and the hate propaganda against Tigray tell us?
I agree. It has been a painful year to all Tigrayans. As you have mentioned, the massacres, the sexual violations, the displacement, the hate propaganda is totally unprecedented. And sometimes we are wondering whether this is Ethiopia we know. There is a deep sense of betrayal. Of course, we thought that it is a country and you don't do this kind of atrocities on your people, but I can tell you that this will have far-reaching consequences because the atrocities, the genocidal war was planned, was done systematically with full backing of the majority of Ethiopian elites. And what's surprising is that, we may have different visions of Ethiopia. It's in the nature of democratic politics, but resorting to genocide to achieve your political objective is a totally different matter. So I think the experience we have gone through in the last 1 year has revealed perhaps the dirty secrets of Ethiopian politics, Ethiopian society, perhaps. Now we are in the middle of the war, and there is a lot of reflection on the part of Tigrayans across the board. We unfortunately witnessed the total destruction of the social contract in the Ethiopian state. They have destroyed the institutions, they have destroyed the constitution, they have destroyed the sense of oneness, that sentiment that united us as one people. I don't know how we are going to reconstitute this. Anyway, it's a very sad experience. At the same time, it's a learning experience. We have awakened. We have known what we don't have known before. So I think it was a very sad and difficult experience, I can say.
Okay. So many people are of the opinion that the international community hasn't put enough pressure on Abiy's regime to solve the political and humanitarian crisis. Do you agree with that assertion?
Yes, I know that there are such sentiments. It's a sentiment perhaps shared by Tigrayans and non-Tigrayans alike, and it has an element of truth, especially in the first phase of the time when Abiy came to power. There was an euphoria in the international community. Everyone was captivated by his false promises, and whatever critical opinion people may have, no one cared to listen. And even to the embarrassment of many who were involved in the process, they awarded him the Nobel Prize. So he was untouchable. But Tigray was writing, talking, and perhaps flagging the warning signals about the problems. But it was a missed opportunity. The international community didn't do anything about it. I think the course of our history could have been different had the international community did something about the problem. There were very obvious warning signals at that point that the country was heading in a difficult and dangerous path. It was only after the government, the Abiy regime, did something obvious in terms of violations of the constitution and resorting to violence and military means to solve some problems, that the international community awakened. I can say there was a transition from that euphoric state into awakening, especially when the government cancelled the election, when Abiy threw prominent opposition political leaders to jail, and eventually when he waged war on Tigray. There was a sense of awakening on the part of the international community, and there were pronouncements, expressions of concern. But again, it was not enough. It was not enough to change the behavior of the government. And lastly, in the middle of the war, the international community was outraged by the way the war was managed. And I think at that point, the international community its position came in line with international law. They were principled. I think if I can say that they condemned the genocidal war, even demanded an independent international investigation on the matter, and bring those who are perpetrators into justice. They have also publicly condemned the fact that Isaias and Abiy were using hunger as an instrument of war, rape as an instrument of war, and they have also demanded an independent investigation to this effect. They have also demanded occupation forces, Eritrean forces and the Amhara forces to exit from Tigray, and asked and requested for the resolution of the conflict through dialogue. At this point, we can say that in terms of positions, they did the right thing, but there was no enough pressure on the government to accept that offer. But in general, we can reasonably say that the international community had tried its best, especially on the humanitarian front. On the humanitarian front, the intention of Abiy and Isaias was totally frightening to imagine, you see. Their plan was to seal off Tigray from the rest of the world and do what they planned to do on the people of Tigray. And the good news is that the international community really said that, okay, there is a very dangerous development in Tigray. The two governments are using hunger as an instrument of war. Genocide is going on. And I think we should not underestimate the role played by the international community at this point, because I cannot imagine what could have happened to Tigray had they not really pronounced their concerns and at the same time provided food to the Tigray people. Because they were very clear. Abiy and Isaias were very clear in their objective. They wanted to starve the Tigray people to surrender, starve to death. It was another front of the war. So I think the government didn't do anything about it. Rather, it was creating complications so that people will not be assisted. But the international community forced it into its way to Tigray and did what it can do. So I think we should not underestimate the role of the international community in this regard. But I'm not saying that this is enough. I'm not saying that the international community has done what it can do. Now, the humanitarian situation is at a frightening stage. Children have started to die now. Now we are talking about children in the vicinity of towns and cities. I can't say anything about those children and poor peasants in the rural areas where there is no access. We don't know what's happening there. So I think the international community should do something about that. It has not done enough in this regard. There are many bilateral and multilateral instruments to force the government to open up, to lift the siege. Otherwise, there can be possibly regrettable developments in the humanitarian front. Otherwise, I can say, with all its limitations, the international community has tried to contribute to the peaceful resolution of the conflict, though very weak, though not enough. So I think we should see it in this context. Okay, the position was evolving along the phases. It has reached what it has reached now. I think it needs to be strengthened. It needs to be meaningful.
Okay. I agree that there's a change in their position, but nothing meaningful has been done. The war is still going on. Like you said, humanitarian conditions are deteriorating. Shouldn't the international community do something substantial?
I agree with your commentary. We are all frustrated about the whole thing. You see, I cannot give you a convincing reason, and you cannot explain it, because now thousands have started to die, and the international community has not done enough, as I have said earlier. Perhaps I can guess why, perhaps, but I don't think it is convincing. I don't think there is sufficient explanation for this kind of, I may not say it, indifference, but a very mild, weak response of the international community. Perhaps the international community is not monolithic, perhaps. It is perhaps in the nature of international politics. There are countries, organizations that sincerely try to resolve the crisis through dialogue. There are countries that sincerely try to address the humanitarian catastrophe on the horizon. And some of them have already applied some punitive measures against the Abiy administration and the Eritrean government, as evidenced by the recent presidential directive of President Biden. At the same time, there are also powerful countries, members of the Security Council, that are not helpful, that made international concerted efforts very difficult, even impossible. There were many resolutions that could have helped resolve the conflict through negotiation. There were resolutions in the Security Council that could have helped alleviate the humanitarian crisis, but they vetoed every single resolution. I think The fact that the international community is not monolithic may have contributed to that. Even our continental organization and the African Union has forsaken its responsibility as an African institution. They rather prefer to stand on the side of government committing genocide against its own people. We are deeply disappointed by that. Of course, we have great respect to African institutions like African Union, but the current leadership has not lived up to its responsibilities. So I think the fact that the international community is diverse, has different interests and level of commitment, may have contributed to the weak international response to the crisis and to the general crisis, political crisis. But we should not be deflected in terms of our understanding about who is responsible to the whole process. It is the Ethiopian government. It's its own making, the crisis is its own making. And unless it's ready to resolve the crisis, both the political and the humanitarian, the international community could do only so much. It's constrained by the fact that we have a government in Addis Ababa that doesn't have any clue about international norms, a government that doesn't care about the well-being of its people, and a government that doesn't have any interest to solve problems in the context of peaceful dialogue and political discourse. So I think the final analysis, it is the Ethiopian government that's responsible for the whole thing. The international community cannot replace it and resolve our problem. On our part, we have always been ready to talk on all facets of the problem, political and the humanitarian. But we don't have now a partner to resolve the problem. Perhaps, again, I'm not saying that the international community has no role. It has a very significant role in resolving the problem, both the political and the humanitarian. So I think what I can say to those who are not helping in the process, the big powers that matter in international politics, but who are not interested to resolve the crisis in a just way. I can only say that, okay, if you want to help Ethiopia, help the people, not the region. Mm. If they don't want at least to help the people, don't be complicit, don't be cooperative, and don't be an accomplice in the genocidal war waged against Tigray. I can tell them that this region may not last long. The only permanent is the people. So I think they must help towards the construction of an internationally concerted effort towards solving the problem. To those who are helping, what I can say is that, okay, you are trying your best, but it's not enough. There are, as I have mentioned, many bilateral and multilateral instruments to address the problem. Otherwise, if they continue in this kind of approach, a very mild diplomatic approach, the government will not respond. It's not a government that responds to such kind of mild diplomatic outreaches. They must do something meaningful. Otherwise, it will be regrettable if more thousands die because of lack of international effort.
Okay. So Abiy accuses the Tigrayan government of failing to reciprocate the unilateral ceasefire and for expanding the war to the Amhara region, and portrays the Tigray government as an obstacle to dialogue. How do you respond to this?
Yes, I know that he routinely finger points at us, but he cannot mislead anybody because our position is very clear, and those who matter in the international arena know who is who, what our positions are. It is in our statements, in our letters to the international community, in our statements, public statements, press releases, and so on. We have always been ready to resolve the problems through dialogue. It is Abiy, rather, who has been creating all kinds of excuses to make dialogue impossible. If you remember, in the first phase of the conflict before the war, we wrote a number of letters to the international community. Even we were passing messages to the federal government through different channels that we should resolve this matter through dialogue. You know what he said? And you may remember it. No. There is no moral equivalence between us, the federal government, and you, a subnational entity. He was making it impossible to sit down and resolve the problem. If he cannot talk to a regional state, part of the federation, to whom is he going to talk? The federations are, their very nature, systems of dialogue, conversations, mending conflicts, problems, solving misunderstandings. But he made it impossible. He brought some phrases that gloss over his intentions. His intention was to resolve the matter through military and administrative mechanisms. And later on he said, okay, we can have conversations, but it should be exclusive between the federal government and Tigray. And we said, no, there's nothing particular about it, about Tigray. This is a national problem. It requires an all-inclusive dialogue. We cannot solve it alone. Every stakeholder must be involved. Again, he was making the dialogue impossible. What did he say after the war? He said, okay, this is a law enforcement matter, and dialogue is out of the question because, yes, if he simplified it, if he trivialized it, and relegates it to a mere legal misunderstanding, dialogue is out of question because he cannot resolve a legal matter through dialogue. He made it again impossible. He made dialogue impossible again. And when the international community said, no, this is not a legal matter, it's a political matter, he said, okay, they are decimated. There is no TPLF to talk to. The leadership is killed, captured. So please don't bother me. Again, another excuse to make dialogue impossible. And with military development, when the narrative about our decimation could not be strong enough to convince people, what he did was he went to Parliament, Ethiopian Parliament, and declared TPLF and designated TPLF as terrorist organization. You cannot talk with a terrorist organization. It's obvious. And he's again making it impossible to resolve the problem through dialogue. eventually, when he was decimated militarily and forced out of Tigray, rather than, at this point, we cannot solve the problem through military means, and let's go to a round table discussion and resolve it through dialogue. What he did was he imposed a siege, an all-encompassing siege on Tigray, and again making it impossible to resolve the problem through dialogue. You see, the reason why we went to the Amhara region and Afar was not because of some other military political ambitions. It was purely for reasons related to the siege. We wanted to break the siege. It's a struggle for survival. It's like a drowning person struggling to breathe. And rather than contribute to the solution, to the peaceful resolution of the conflict, the siege has complicated the whole thing, expanded the conflict into other regions. Now, if it doesn't lift the siege, we'll go as far as we can until we are able to breathe, until we break the siege. And we will do it. More sacrifices, yes. More struggles, more complications, yes. Even more adverse impact on the future of the country, yes. But we don't have any other option. It's not a war of choice to us. It's a matter of necessity. It's a matter of survival. We are not very proud about the whole process, but it's a must. It's an imposed war. So I think Abiy has no the moral authority to accuse TPLF for not cooperating towards a peaceful resolution. And I can tell you, as a last note, Abiy has never resolved any problem through dialogue, through democratic means. Even inner party matters. Look at what has happened to Lema. Lema Magarsa, the person who really forsaken his political opportunities to give him the opportunity to sit on the premiership position. That person, that benevolent person in terms of political relationship between them, I mean. He was too benevolent. But I don't know where he is now. No one knows where he is. Look at what has happened to Jawar, Muhammad, Bakala Gabra, to Iskandar Naga. What is their crime? He criminalized political opposition and threw them into jail. He doesn't tolerate any divergence, any diversity of views. He's not capable of resolving problems. Look at what happened to LF. He criminalized them, divided them, and now they are deconstructed, at least in terms of organization. He cannot deconstruct the opinion the Oromo people have towards OLF, but in terms of institutions, in terms of organization, he has deconstructed it. On LF, the Ogaden National Liberation Front is under attack now. But these organizations came to Ethiopia, forsook armed military resistance in the hope that there is a new dispensation, political dispensation, where they can peacefully, legally, democratically run their political agendas. But he betrayed them, like what he has betrayed TPLF. TPLF was a member organization of the PRDF. People may have forgotten that. He isolated it, denigrated it, blackmailed it, and eventually waged war on the people of Tigray. So I think he may think that he is the smartest guy in the world, in town. And the rest of the world is an idiot with short memory, as he always depicts it. But we don't forget. And everything is on record. So there is no any ground to accuse TPLF for not cooperating to peacefully resolve the problem. He should take responsibility. And he has no moral authority. And I think no one believes that narrative.
Okay. Abiy's administration also accuses the international community of, especially the U.S., Europe, and at times UN agencies, of supporting TPLF and of interfering in internal affairs. What can be said to these allegations?
I think it is the same logic, the same mindset that finger pointed at TPLF for not solving the problem. He has extended it to international level and accusing the international community for his own problems, you see. This guy doesn't take responsibility for his actions. Someone must be blamed for anything. Otherwise, the international community, I think, doesn't have any hidden conspiratorial agenda against Abiy. It is the same entity that awarded him the Nobel Prize. What they are doing is that they are concerned, and it's understandable that they are concerned. You see, Abiy and his sycophants don't understand that the contemporary international order is a rule-based system. There are rules, norms, conventions, laws that you cannot transgress. You cannot commit genocide and go away with it under contemporary international law. Genocide is a crime under international law. Using rape and hunger as an instrument of war is crime under international law. So what can the international community do except express concern and demand the government to respect international conventions and norms? I think they have an alternative world, I think, the people like Abiy, and perhaps they expect the rest of the world to congratulate them for doing this kind of heinous crimes. And secondly, do they have the moral authority to talk about sovereignty, interference in international affairs, internal matters? He has invited an enemy state, Eritrea, to kill, vandalize his own people. He has already outsourced Western Tigray to TPLF. There is no sacred thing for Abiy. He can sell, he can outsource anything if he believes that it serves his political purpose. So what I mean is this talk about sovereignty, interference in internal matters are meaningless, especially in the context of the behavior of Abiy. And secondly, there is no sovereignty. There is no internal affairs when it comes to human rights now. Human rights is a universal thing. The whole global community is one family when it comes to human rights. You cannot use a curtain called sovereignty to massacre and violate the rights of your own people. No. They must understand that we are living in a new world where human rights are in the front seat when it comes to relationships between states and organizations. Otherwise, now, Abiy has put this country in the category of Eritrea, North Korea, and so on. Has shut down more than 30 embassies now. He's at loggerheads with all institutions, global institutions that are part of the global system. Now, yesterday he expelled more than 7 senior officials of UN agencies. And I think this guy has no clue about the way international diplomacy is run, managed. As I have told you, he has his own alternative world. And what matters to him is anything that helps his personal political ambitions. He doesn't care about Ethiopia, about Ethiopian diplomacy. I think now we are witnessing, sadly, the end of Ethiopian diplomacy. He takes every opportunity in his international community to insult, to denigrate respectable institutions, leaders, and so on. I don't know what will happen to this country of 120 million people in this kind of behavior in international relations, you see. So I think it is a continuation of what he does at home, that he's finger pointing at the international community. International community, with all its problems, is trying to address the problem rather than cooperate with them and converse with all stakeholders, local and international. He makes reasonable, rational conversation on the matter impossible, to avoid dialogue. Again, as this 11th hour, it is the 11th hour of his regime now. But still, the old habit, the old style of coercive politics is being followed by this guy. So I think no one takes him seriously if finger points at the international community for his own problems.
Okay, thank you. The international community has been calling for a negotiated settlement to this current crisis. Is there any hope for a dialogue and a peaceful settlement to the ongoing conflict?
I think I have mentioned this point earlier. The idea of dialogue was on the table for a very long time, and we were ready to be part of the process. And we know from the start that there is no any other solution other than dialogue. Eventually, if he reconsiders his positions, we will be going to dialogue. Otherwise, we will take care of him by other means anyway. But the international community was insisting on that for a very long time. But it is because of him, because of Abiy, that all and every single initiative was torpedoed. But now there are two, perhaps, developments that may force him to come into a negotiating table. One is the balance of power. Now, the balance of power is in our favor. There is no any way he can attain his objectives by military means. No. The problem is, as I have told you, this guy has his own alternative planet, and he doesn't understand. He cannot observe, he cannot see reality as it is. So, again, he may not have read it. I am not very sure, because this guy is detached from reality. But the reality is there is a visible change of balance of power. There is no any way other than peaceful means to resolve this problem. Secondly, the international community is becoming more serious, more concerned about the whole thing. Now, as we have observed from their statements and positions, they are concerned not only about Ethiopia, the very existence of this country as a united nation, but also about its impact on the region. Because it's a big country, a country of 120 million people, a seat of the African Union. Whatever happens to Ethiopia will have a processional effect on the whole region. So they are very seriously and genuinely concerned about that. So they are now ready to use all the tools they have in their hands, both bilateral and multilateral, to force this guy to sit on the negotiating table. So perhaps this may also contribute to the peaceful resolution of the problem. But what I can tell you is that, again, our position is clear. We are ready to resolve the problems through dialogue. But he cannot strangle us and ask us to sit on negotiating table. Please lift the siege. This is very simple. It's a matter of an instruction that can be finalized in a minute. You can call whatever the institutions are responsible and lift the siege and let the occupation forces, both the Eritrean and Amhara forces, exit from Tigray. As simple as that. We can save thousands of lives. We can give this country a chance to restart itself, to reconstitute itself, to heal its wounds, perhaps, if there are some remaining elements that can bring this country together, continue to as the United Nations. But we are open for this opportunity. But it all depends again on the decision of an unpredictable despot. So I cannot tell you for certain that eventually this crisis will be solved through negotiation. But what I can tell you is that through dialogue or through force, we will attain every single of our demands. They are just demands. We are not there. We are not out there to dominate or to perhaps interfere in the rights of self-administration of peoples. And, it's all about our rights. But we will get them, and we will make these criminals accountable in the final analysis through dialogue or otherwise. Otherwise, I can tell you that it will be up to Abiy. The ball is in his court. We are ready to resolve the problem through dialogue.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That wraps up our program for the day. Thank you for joining us. See you next week with another guest.